From slavery to the ministry, little was known about a remarkable South Carolina woman who answered her calling as an evangelist following emancipation. Her autobiography, waiting in the archives of a university in Ohio to be rediscovered. Let's welcome Dr. Crystal Lucky, Associate Dean for Undergrad Programs at Villanova University and editor of A Mysterious Life and Calling. Thank you so much for joining us. And first, tell us a bit more about Reverend Charlotte Riley and why she captured your interest.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. When I was doing some research on Black preaching women, I was doing some research at Wilberforce University in Wilberforce, Ohio, right outside of Dayton. I was doing some research on some Black preaching women from the Mid-Atlantic region. And so women like Jarena Lee and Zilpha Elaw, Julia Foote, a woman named Amanda Berry Smith, all of whom had illustrious preaching careers during the 19th century and were connected with the AME Church. I went to Wilberforce to do some research, and I was working in their archives. And it was really quite serendipitous that I uncovered, I don't like saying discovered because she was already there, but I uncovered this narrative that had been a part of these offerings from Bishop Levi Jenkins Coppin from the AME Church. And Riley was this incredible woman who was born in 1839 in Charleston. She was born to enslaved parents. She herself was enslaved until emancipation. And she, as you said in the introduction, she had an illustrious career as a preaching woman in the AME Church who was actually licensed to preach. So she wasn't just an itinerant preacher. She actually had a license. And she caught my attention because I was used to working with women from the Mid-Atlantic region who had not been enslaved and was really interested to find someone in the South that had been enslaved and then had a career.
That's so fascinating. And what appears to maybe folks on the outside is that that's a very niche subject matter to be researching. Of course, for you, it was a primary focus, but because of your investigation and your research, you happened upon her story. And it's very similar to how we happened upon you, because really what brought all of this about, your contribution to the publishing was in 2016. So if you wonder why are we talking about it today, well, Lincolnville, where she had called home, the green space there is now protected. So there's a request there to protect the green space, but then she was mentioned in this article, and then that's what brought us to you. So it's really interesting how her story keeps emerging in different ways over the years. But tell us a little bit more about just that path of her becoming a minister and also becoming educated, which was little heard of in those days.
That's right. So when she was a young girl, she was her mother died when she was very young. Her father died in 1861, but because her mother died so young, she was really raised by her grandmother, and her grandmother's mistress is really who Riley spent her time in service to her grandmother's mistress. And, Charleston's history with slavery was very interesting because there were sort of mixed populations. So there were African Americans that were able to learn to read. There were some that were able to actually buy out some of their time. And they could, some had a little bit more mobility and flexibility in terms of movement. And so for Riley, she was able to go to school that was run by a free Black woman, a woman that Riley calls the Widow Duncan. And she had a school where Riley was able to learn to read, she was able to learn to do a little math, and she was able to learn to sew. And so very early on, she was able to get some education. She also had 4 brothers, and we don't know really much about them. I think they survived to adulthood, but we don't know much about their education.
Right.
And then during the Civil War, Riley went with her mistress to Anderson, South Carolina, where she spent most of the time of the war. And that was there where she grew up and she met her husband.
Oh, that is so interesting. Really fascinating history, a mysterious life and calling. And I would recommend anyone to pick up this book. You can find it on Amazon. And Dr. Lucky, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing her story with us. I think it's important to keep these stories alive, to keep these memories of our people here in South Carolina alive for future generations.
Absolutely. And I so appreciate anytime I get to talk about this kind of stuff, because as you can tell, I'm so excited about it, and to learn more and more, particularly about Black preaching women in the area.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lucky. We so appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We're back in 2 minutes.